Welcome to Modus Cafe. Join us for fun, lighthearted, and educational conversations around training, athletic longevity, and the human side of climbing, with your hosts, Mercedes Pahlmeyer and Katja Dev.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode. I'm Mercedes Pahlmeyer, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking about periodization and how to plan your whole year of climbing so that you can successfully peak your performance twice in the next year. And you're going to plan out everything. I'm going to show you how to do that. But first, I just want to say this is my last week in Southern California. It's really sad to be leaving the sun and head back to Seattle, where it is currently raining. And I also just want to say, if you're in the LA area, that we're thinking about you. I've definitely have friends who have been affected by the fire, and I really do hope that you're doing okay. And if you need anything, please, reach out. Modus has a pretty large community, especially in California. And if there's anything that we can help you with, please let us know. Our thoughts are with you. All right, so let's transition into periodization. So in today's episode, we're going to cover kind of the basics of what periodization is, some of the semantics around what is periodization. We'll also cover what a program looks like if you're going to be peaking for twice this year. So that means there's basically two phases where you're going to be focusing on performance. This information is going to be really great for anyone who's an intermediate or advanced climber who has never done periodization before. And I will say that it is kind of a tough thing to stick to, but if you can do it, you can really set yourself up for success. And by the end of the episode, I do want to cover some of the common pitfalls that come with a periodization program when we fully plan out a whole year. Let's talk about what periodization is. So the definition really is just a systematic planning of an athletic training program that optimizes performance and hopefully reduces the risk of overtraining. Really, like what we're trying to do is paint a really good picture of what your year is going to look like and plan each phase building up to your performance phase. And when it comes to periodization, this allows for you to train specific physical qualities such as strength, endurance, power, and of course, performance. The goal is to allow for progressive overload throughout the year while providing enough recovery to prevent burnout and hopefully facilitate the best adaptation to your training. So, what these phases typically look like is a macro cycle, a mesocycle, and a microcycle. A macro cycle is really the longest phase and spans an entire year. For most of us, we're going to be looking at a year. For maybe an elite athlete, this could be maybe more like a season. But for the purposes of today's episode, the macro cycle is a full year of the program. What it does is sets long-term goals, and then we're going to organize those long-term goals into smaller phases. So the mesocycles are looking at a training program and breaking it down into months. And this helps us work on specific adaptations. So let's say we're working on endurance. We can just focus for a month just on endurance and get really focused without letting us get distracted by a lot of other things, which is really common when it comes to climbing training. And if you don't have a plan, you kind of get the shiny object syndrome, and it's easy to have a lot of FOMO. You see other people doing things and you want to do those things. What's wonderful about planning a whole year is that you can focus and you know that if you stick to this, that you're going to get better. And then we're going to go on to microcycles, which is essentially the shortest training periods, which is typically the weekly view. What are you doing each week? And building out the week to make sure that you're hitting all of the things that you need to hit in order to reach your goal. So again, a periodization program includes a macro cycle, which is the long view, a mesocycle, which is the monthly view, and then the microcycle, which is the weekly view. Now, periodization is really rooted in two principles. The first one, which is progressive overload, and this is gradually increasing the training stimulus to improve performance. So what that means is I'm going to start at a very easy level that I know I can do. For context, let's say I'm going to do a deadlift and I haven't deadlifted in a while, but I'm going to start at 3 sets of 8 reps at a moderate intensity. So let's say, 150 pounds. And each week I might increase the weight by 5 to 10%. And I'm going to do this for 4 to 6 weeks. And that would be a really concrete example of progressive overload. And that's one way of increasing the intensity. So that would be an intensity increase over the 6 weeks. When you're looking at a program long term, you will have to factor some of these things in. You can't do the same stuff over and over again and not change intensity or volume and expect to make changes to your physicality. So make sure that as you're going through this, you are factoring in intensity and volume changes over time. Now, the second principle is super compensation. So this is the body's adaptation process where you get to a point where performance might actually dip a little bit from the intense training, but then you recover and allow your body to adapt. And usually, what happens is that your body is adapting at a much higher level after recovery. So, those are the two main principles that we're focusing on in a year-long program. Now, periodization also incorporates some planned deloads and tapering to allow for this recovery. So, in essence, periodization tailors the training process to match the athlete's needs at various points in the year, maximizing performance and minimizing your risk of overtraining. All right, so let's take a look at how we're going to be planning a year. The first thing you need to do is really define your goal, and you want to write this goal down. Do you have a specific goal climb, or do you have a trip that you're going on? No matter what it is that you're preparing for, I want you to write it down and write down the things that you need in order to be successful for that specific climb or that trip. So, for example, if my goal is to climb 512 in the red, then I'm going to need to have enough fitness to climb on a steep angle for the amount of time that this climb is going for. So maybe it's a 2 minute or 3 minute climb on steep overhanging with a lot of body tension, decent holds. Maybe the holds aren't terrible, but I just need to be able to endure for that amount of time on the wall. So I'm going to make sure that I'm tailoring my program so that it's getting me specifically prepared for that feeling that I need when I get to that 512 goal climb in the red. Another example could be that you're going on a climbing trip and you want to be able to climb all the classics at a certain grade. Then you likely need to train for longer days of climbing and climbing back to back days. So, again, you're going to be creating your program so that you're mimicking what you're going to be doing on your trip. So, you can choose any goal that you like and make sure that you're writing all of those very important things down that you need in order to execute that goal. So now, once you have your goal, maybe it's your trip or a project, I want you to put some dates down, roughly the dates that you're going to be going on these trips or your project. And we're going to give you kind of 2 points in the year in order to do this. Maybe you have a couple different projects that you want to do, and you can choose 2 of those projects in the spring and 2 of those projects in the fall. Or maybe you're going on 2 different climbing trips. One is going to be at the Red, another one could be at the New River Gorge. You're going to plan out these dates and you're going to put that on a piece of paper or maybe your calendar so you can see where that is going to be. And then what you're going to do from those dates is actually plan backward. I really like to do that because you need to know when you're tapering. You're going to take about a week to taper from your training program and allow your body to recover before you head into your trip or onto your project climb. So now you have your dates and you have the dates of when you need to start tapering. Now, the next thing is to understand what you actually need to work on based on your project. What are your weaknesses? What are you going to have to really focus on so that you can be successful? And the best way to do this is to look at some assessments. In last week's podcast, I went over some assessments that you could do that cover the physicality of climbing to the mental state of climbing, even your general health. Go back to those, and that can help you refine what it is that you need to focus on through the year. Now, the next part is putting together your phases. Generally, we're going to follow an endurance, strength, and power progression before you go into your performance phase. Now, not everybody needs to follow that progression, but if this is your first time ever putting together a periodization program, then I would say it's a great way to build out your at least your first half of the year. And then, of course, you want to include some rest times. You can do this as you get into more of the monthly view, but remember that we want to make sure that we're giving your body time to recover. And I really like to implement deloads, which happen every 3 to 4 weeks. And you're going to decrease your overall volume by maybe 30 to 50%. This is a great time to allow your body to adapt to the training that you've just been doing. So on your calendar, you can roughly sketch out when your deloads are going to be. And this kind of comes in with maybe other things that are happening in your life, such as vacations or maybe a kid's trip that you need to go with your family. Think about some of those things. Can you align some of your deloads or your vacations together so that it works seamlessly? And then, of course, as you're going through this program, you want to make sure that you're tracking your progress. And I really like to use the workouts themselves as a way to track my progress. Am I getting better at these drills that I'm performing? Now you have your dates planned in your calendar. You know when you're going to be tapering, and you kind of roughly know when you're going to be taking vacations and doing these deloads. Now we're going to be putting in the phases. And usually the best time to start at the beginning of the year in the winter is after the holidays. So let's say, maybe January 1st is going to be the start of your base building or endurance phase. And this phase generally lasts 2 to 3 months. We include endurance and some strength building in this phase. After that, we're going to be focusing on a transition period where you're going to be moving from general strength to specific strength, really focusing on the things that you need to get strong at for your specific climb or your climbing trip. And then after that transition phase, you're going to be in your performance phase. And this is when you're going to be on your climb or doing your thing. And I like to give at least a month. It could even be 2, depending on where you are in the world, how long the season lasts outdoors. This is especially if you're going to be climbing outside. And you want to give yourself some flexibility there. And your body also goes through a lot of changes during a performance phase. You might notice that you might need at least a couple weeks to get used to the rock, or maybe you need some time to get over the jet lag. So think about some of those things and allow ample time in order to perform. After your first performance phase, you can take a couple weeks off. This is a really great time to recover, maybe to reflect on your training plan and how well you did. Give yourself a good pat on the back for working so hard and really dedicating yourself to the training program and working on your performance. At this point, you have a choice. If things went really well in your first 4 months, then you can repeat what you just did to prepare you for the next performance phase. Or this could be a really good time to focus on what I think a lot of climbers need to work on, which is power. So this would be putting you basically in the summer season. And what you could do is continue to work a little bit of endurance, continue to work on some strength, but have a heavy focus on power development. And working on power is quite essential if you want to continue seeing progress in your climbing, especially as you get into the harder and harder grades. You're going to need more and more power. So you can really dedicate a couple months of power building and then go back into a transition phase for a month before you go into your performance season. And then after your second performance season, you can decide, all right, it's probably November by this time. We're starting to get into the holidays. This could be a really great time to recover again. Maybe you go do some skiing or you do other things. Don't take time off from being active, but you can change your focus, give your brain something new to think about, give your body something new to focus on as well. So we call this the off season. It's really up to you. You don't have to take that off season, but I do encourage you to at least take a little bit of time off before going back into a base building in the winter again. All right, so we just went over kind of the big overview of what a year looks like. So hopefully you have all of your dates ready. You have a general outline of your phases. And now we're going to go into more of the details of what those phases look like more of the meso and the micro cycle. So let's start with the winter phase, or what we're calling kind of the base building and strength phase. The phase goal here is to develop endurance and strength, general strength. And the endurance aspect is going to be building time on the wall as well as off the wall. We are going to do some cardio. I do really think that cardio goes a long way just for our general health, but it can help you with general fitness as well. You're always going to be, no matter what phase you're in, you're going to be working on climbing technique, you're going to be working on lifting, and you're going to be working on finger strength. So when it comes to climbing technique, think about the things that you really need to work on and integrate that into your program. Maybe you start every session with a climbing technique, 10 to 15 minutes of focused work, intentional work on your climbing movement, and getting better at the footwork techniques and body position needed for your climb. For the strength focus, for general strength, we want to focus on the 5 major movements, which is a push, a pull, a hinge, a squat, and something for your core. It doesn't really matter what those exercises are, as long as you can increase the intensity over the coming months. All right. So it doesn't really matter. Of course, some of my favorites are pull ups, deadlifts, bench press, back squats, and for the core, some planks and hanging leg lifts. For your finger strength, I really do think it's a good time to start incorporating it as early as you can in your climbing career. And if you're brand new to finger strength, refer to my beginner's hangboard episode. But if you're accustomed to hanging on a hangboard, now is a great time in the winter season to start working on some max hangs. And this is a good time because you're really nailing down your tendon conditioning in the beginning of the year. Now, one note that I want to make is that power really should be peppered in throughout the whole year. And it especially needs to be peppered into every session. And power is really easy to incorporate. You don't need to do much in order to get really explosive in your body. But the main thing is to have that intention of being explosive and then just choose a couple exercises. So one way that I personally incorporated into my practice is in the warm-up. I do jump rope. I do some ball slams. I like to do some medicine ball throws or box jumps. Some very, very simple exercises, and it can be really short. You don't want to overdo power training. And I'll talk a little bit more about power as we get into that phase. But just remember, incorporate power into your session. So now let's look at what a week would look like for this base building phase. Let's say you're going to be climbing 3 to 4 days a week. 1 to 2 days of climbing should be kind of endurance focused, where you're going to be working on technique every time and you're working on movement efficiency and time on the wall. You're trying not to get pumped. All right. You're staying in a very easy to moderate level, conditioning your forearms, building those structures in your forearms so that you can stay on the wall longer without getting pumped. And then 1 to 2 days can also be very technique focused. Maybe you work on climbs that are more your anti-style or climbs that get you ready for your goal climb. Really get into a rhythm of working on those climbs. They can be a little bit harder. That's totally fine as long as you're being intentional. I like to plan my finger strength on my climbing days, either as a warm-up or after your climbing session. Just make sure that as you're getting into your finger strength section of your workout that you're not going to failure. Being really fatigued before going into finger strength will actually hold you back in making progress. So, think about what your finger strength looks like right now if you really need to work finger strength. If you don't really, and it's not like a high priority, you can put it after your climbing. If it is a high priority, then I would start your sessions with finger strength. With the strength training component, 2 to 3 days of strength training a week is going to be great in this phase because, again, this is kind of the focus is to build as much strength in your body. And you want to focus on those full body movements and working on really good movement patterns in those exercises. Now, you'll probably have 1, maybe 2 days of recovery, and this isn't just inactive days. We still want to work on things that are going to help you become a better climber and to be really healthy in your body. So things like flexibility training or yoga, maybe it's a little bit of cardio or walking. Those are all going to be awesome. So now this winter season, the base building phase, you need to incorporate your deloading and recovery. So go back, make sure that you've got those in your calendar every 3 to 4 weeks, and you're decreasing your overall volume by 30 to 50%. All right, so let's talk about the transition phase to specific strength. So this is phase 2, and this generally lasts about a month. The goal of this phase is to transition you from general base building into more specific strength. We're going to be slowly peaking your strength before you head outdoors. And really, what you're going to be doing here is trying a lot harder in your climbing and really setting yourself up for the mental side of projecting and red pointing. A lot of the time when clients come to work with me, the first thing that we kind of talk about is what it's like to project. Do they project at all? And a lot of the time people say no. So think about this for yourself. What does projecting feel like for you? Do you like it? Do you hate it? Do you do it? If you're going to be projecting outside, if you have a goal climb, you need to start working on the process of projecting. And the transition time is a decent time to start working on that. So let's look at the climbing side of what you're going to be doing. Again, we're going to be working on a lot of technique, incorporate that. But generally, what happens when you're climbing really hard, technique kind of takes care of itself. But I still like to focus on a technique at the beginning of the session so that it can seamlessly work its way into my harder climbing. So you're going to be doing a lot of technique work even at your limit level. Then some other drills that you're going to be incorporating is going to be a little bit more power endurance focused. Maybe this is boulders on the minute. Maybe it's 4x4s. This is just to get your energy system primed. It's like the icing on the cake so that you have the best fitness going into your performance phase. Some other things that you could be working on is contact strength. So working on explosive movements and working on precision and catching holds. You could also work on being a lot more explosive when you're climbing, and this can really help you, especially if you're working on overhanging climbs. So now on the strength side, we're going to be transitioning the strength from going from like max strength big lifts into more specific exercises that mimic climbing movement. Now, there is very specific strength, which is you actually on the wall and doing specific climbing moves. You're going to be taking care of that in the limit climbing. We need something in between, which is strength exercises that are close to your climbing movement. So I really like single arm push-ups, ring rows, single leg squats. And of course, you're going to be working on some finger strength, continuing to increase the intensity from what you were doing in your building phase. You should be increasing your sets and your intensity there because this is really going to help you transition over. And of course, you're going to continue peppering in your power. So again, maybe even in your warm-ups, or maybe you have a power circuit that lasts maybe 5 to 10 minutes that works on latching holds. It could be ball slams, could be power pull-ups, anything that's super explosive, but it should feel easy. Looking at the weekly cycle. So we're going to try to push this to 4 days a week of climbing. If 3 days a week still works for you and you can't do much more, that's totally fine. But try to get to about 4 days a week of climbing. 2 of those days are going to be focused on trying really hard in your climbing. And if your goal route is a sport climb, make sure that those days are sport climbing. A third day of climbing could be focused on power endurance, maybe a little bit of endurance and power endurance combined. And then another day, make sure that you're bouldering and getting explosive movement on the wall. You're still building strength in this phase. So if you can get to your strength training at least twice a week, that's going to be awesome. No more than 2. And then, of course, you're going to have your rest and recovery days. Continue to do what you normally do to make sure you're optimally recovered for that week. And then, of course, going back to your deloading and recovery, make sure that you're deloading every 3 to 4 weeks, but you're going to incorporate a tapering. This tapering is 1 week before you go on your trip. And so if you're going on a trip and it takes a couple days to get there, incorporate that into your tapering. if you're not going on a trip and you know that, oh, okay, this weekend I'm going to be trying my project, you want to taper for about a week before you go. And tapering really, again, it's just like a deload. You're just going to reduce the amount of volume and maybe even the intensity in your tapering. Okay, so now you're getting into your performance phase. This is what you've been working for the last 3 to 4 months. This phase could last about a month or two, depending where you're at in the world. Like some seasons last longer than others. The goal here is to get on your project, try really hard. And the other goal is to maintain strength. Often what happens when we're projecting a lot, we actually lose a lot of strength. And we can get really stale in our projecting, especially if you're going to the same projects over and over again. It can be mentally tiring. So having some planned strength days is going to be really helpful. I would still say, once a week of strength training. If you're really adapted to strength, you could do strength training once every 10 days. And on your recovery days, continue to focus on flexibility. This is a really great time to kind of get better at some of your flexibility because it does help you with some of your recovery. Of course, it does matter what kind of flexibility training you're doing. If you're doing kind of like max weighted flexibility training, that's probably not the best for your recovery. But if you're working on end range strength and more relaxed stretching, this is a great time to do it. Some of the strength exercises that I really like to focus on in a maintenance phase is basically like weighted pull-ups, some deadlifts, and some fingerboard. Super simple. And this should be good enough to kind of get you through that month or two. So at this point, you're at the end of your first performance phase. So if you're not going to repeat your program that you just created and doing a whole nother cycle of that, you can work on power development. And power is probably one of the harder systems to develop. It takes a really long time. One, because there's a huge mental component to being explosive. You really have to be so mindful and intentional when you're being explosive. So you really have to condition your body and your mind to be as powerful as possible. And when you dedicate a couple months to being as powerful as you can, you might see a really huge shift in your dynamic movement, especially on overhangs. So when we're thinking about power training, you have to think about moving as fast as possible with a lot of speed, with a lot of explosiveness. And usually that means you have to train with lighter weight. So things like ball slams. You don't want to use a 50-pound ball because you're going to be moving that ball really slowly. You want to teach your body to move fast. And the only way to do that is to use lighter weights. There is an argument for lifting really, really heavy with that mind-muscle connection of moving as explosively as possible. That works. It does work. But you also need to have the other side of the spectrum of lightweight and allowing your body to feel what it's like to move really quickly. So just remember that when it comes to pure power training, you want to be working at a much lower percentage of your 1 rep max, anywhere between 30 to 60% of your 1 rep max, and moving as fast as possible. So yeah, with ball slams, you're trying to slam that ball as fast as you can, and you're maybe only using a 10-pound ball. When it comes to power pull-ups, you're using a lot of elastic bands so that you can be as springy as you can. You could even do sprinting. I love sprinting. I used to be a sprinter, so for me that comes really easily, but it reminds my body how to move as fast as possible. So try not to get sidetracked by really heavy lifting. It is very important to do heavy lifting in this phase, but that's not what's going to get you powerful. Moving explosively with lightweight, that's what's going to make your body move as fast as possible. So now in this power development phase, what you're going to focus on is some climbing drills that can be on the training board. Maybe you're focusing on short efforts. This could be 2 to 3 moves. Maybe you're trying to move as fast as you can, or you're just moving explosively in one move and you're working on precision and contact strength. Other exercises or drills that you could do are dynos. You could do elimination on a super easy climb and try to get further and further apart with your moves. This is going to set yourself up mentally really well too for these dynamic moves. When it comes to the strength focus, some really fun exercises are kettlebell swings, ball slams, explosive pull-ups, plyometrics, which is jumping down from a box and jumping up. And of course, you can actually do some power training specifically for the fingers. And this would be explosive hangs on a hangboard where your fingers are just above the edge and you drop down on the edge kind of fast and you try to catch yourself for a few seconds and then you let go. And you do this in cluster sets. This is a really great way for your fingers to get adapted to power training if you've never done power training before. Of course, if you're going to be doing this on the fingerboard, make sure that you've been hangboarding for some time because power training on a hangboard is very advanced, and you need to be very comfortable in your grip positions in order to achieve the outcome that you want. All right, let's look at the weekly schedule. What does a weekly schedule look like for a power phase? I would dedicate one day to being as explosive as possible. You're still going to be climbing 3 to 4 days a week, and one of those days you're going to focus on dynamic movement. So you can do a grouping of all of those things that we talked about earlier. So dynos, explosive movements on a training board. Now, a second day could be dedicated to some energy system work, and you could work on climbing fast with some good rest in between. You could do a 4x4 and you climb for maybe 20 to 30 seconds and you rest for a couple minutes and then you do that again. And you could do this 4 times on one climb and then do that on 3 other climbs. That's a really great way of getting some energy system work in as well. Other things that I like are boulders on the minute or boulders every 2 to 3 minutes, depending on the difficulty and the explosiveness of that climb. And in this phase, this could be a really great time to continue to get outside because, it's the summer. You might be able to go outside. You could either work some hard climbs or you could work on moderate climbs, continue to get some volume in. Sometimes when we're working on power, the volume, our base volume could potentially decrease or even plateau. So this could be a good time to get a little extra climbing in outdoors at the moderate level. And then we're going to go into strength training. So 1 to 2 times a week, you still want to focus on maintaining strength. So at least one day of some heavy lifting. And then you could do another day of this explosive exercise movements, such as the kettlebell swings and medicine ball slams. And of course, work in your rest days, continuing your flexibility and mobility training. Okay, so now we're getting close to your second performance season. About a month before your performance season, if you feel like you need a little specific strength just to get you primed for the things that you want to be doing, start incorporating that. So I give yourself 3 to 4 weeks of some specific strength training, and then you can go into your second performance phase. All right. So continuing with the principles that we talked about earlier in the first performance phase. Then once you're done with your second performance phase, now you have a choice of taking a little bit of time off from climbing. This could be just in time for November, the holidays. You have a choice here. Do you continue training? I would say back off from some of the hard climbing. Mentally, you might be really tired. You might be ready for a change. Maybe you want to go skiing, doing something fun outdoors, or even just not going outdoors at all. But continue to be as active as you can. Keep your fitness up, but decrease the overall intensity so that your body can recover in the next month or two before you go back into base building. Okay, so that was the general overview of what a year could look like. It seems like a lot, and it is. And it can be highly, highly structured. And yes, there are some drawbacks from doing a program like this. But if you are really keen on getting to your goals this year, then it might be worth planning this out and seeing how well you can stick to it. There are going to be things that come up. So, what happens if you get sick? This happens. This happens a lot, especially for folks who are really busy, who have stressful jobs. Maybe you trained a little bit too hard. These things are going to, come up and we're going to have sickness. And generally people are sick for about a week or a bit. And that's totally fine. Just pick up where you left off. You don't have to change too much. Just allow your body to recover from that sickness. That's number one. Don't push through the sickness. There's really, there's no benefit to pushing through sickness. It's really actually just going to hold you back from recovering optimally. So make sure you're fully recovered from your sickness and then just pick up where you left off. if you're sick for over a month, let's say you haven't really been able to train for a month, then I would say go back a month and redo kind of the last month of your training and reassess what your goals are. Maybe realign your expectations with where you're at right now. The expectations are generally where we have a really hard time mentally. If we're not performing at the level that we thought we would be, because our expectations are just way too high based on everything that we've just done, you're going to set yourself up for failure. So make sure that you're adjusting your expectations when things come up or you've been held back from your training. What happens if you have vacation? So again, just make sure that you build this in. Make your vacation a deload, or can you continue to work on your finger strength with a traveling hangboard? Can you do body weight training? Depending on where you're going, you might have access to a climbing gym or a lifting gym. No matter what, traveling shouldn't always be an excuse for taking complete time off. Of course, you can if you need to, especially if you're going to a very remote area. But in general, we can integrate our training into our vacation. Okay, what if your project changes? You know what? That's going to happen, and that's totally okay. You can always change plans. It doesn't mean that your training has completely been useless. You have developed a lot of really good attributes through the 3 to 4 months of training. You're going to be able to adapt your training to a new project. So that's totally fine. That's okay. What happens if you lose interest or motivation? So this is absolutely normal to lose motivation because training can be a grind. And part of it is you have to take some of the thinking out of training. If you think too hard about, oh, I have to do all of these things, that could weigh heavily on our mind. The best thing to do is just get yourself to the gym, start the warm up, and see where that session is going to take you. Because tiredness is going to come up, stress is going to come up, but it shouldn't stop you from getting to the gym. And when you're really consistent in the beginning, that tool of being consistent is really going to help you show up when those times get really tough. Now, what I will say, the caveat to this is that you don't want to keep pushing at the expense of your health. What you're doing needs to feel good. It needs to feel fulfilling. You have to have joy come out of the things that you're doing. And if it's not providing any of those things, then it might be time to reassess what it is that you're doing or reassess your goal and why you're doing it. And I actually did a podcast a couple weeks ago about your big why and goal setting for the year. Go through some of those exercises and see, are you still living in alignment with your values and your identity by going through this training program? And if the answer is no, and that's okay, it's time to change things up. It's okay to abandon your goals, especially if it's not feeling good. What if your trip is canceled? Should you still peak? Yes, absolutely. So if, let's say, a trip gets canceled because of weather, now you've just spent all of this time training for this trip, you are ready to send really hard. So is there somewhere else you could go? Or if not, you can try to perform in the gym. This is a great time to send some really hard things in the gym and work on projecting, work on the tactics of projecting. So if your trip gets canceled, continue to try really hard in the gym. And lastly, a lot of people wonder, what if I want to send all year round? And you can, that's definitely a thing that people try to do. But whether you're going to reach your peak performance, that's something entirely different. And that's really what this plan is doing, is peaking you twice a year so that we know that you can really perform your best a couple times a year. It's really difficult to peak your performance all year round. It's very difficult to do. If we figured out how to do this, our elite athletes would look and perform very differently. Some athletes work all year just to peak once, especially for the Olympics. So there is a science to this. And if you're trying to send all year round, you're likely just working at a moderate to high level rather than a super high level. All right. So just keep that in mind. You have a choice. This periodization program is for people who can commit to training for a certain amount of time and then peak for a certain amount of time. And if that's not you, that's totally okay. All right. Not everybody is climbing for the same reasons. So yeah, just make sure that you're doing things that you want to do. All right. So I hope this periodization program helps you decide what to do for the whole year. And at the very least, it gives you a rough plan of what you can focus on so that you don't get distracted through the year. Let me know how this periodization goes, and all the best with your planning. And I'll catch you in the next one.